Welcome back to another podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. In this episode, we are going to be reviewing Coder Foundry. I invited a couple guests on that graduated from Coder Foundry. We're going to hear about their experiences and dive into the nitty-gritty. So welcome, Mark. If you would you go ahead and do a quick short intro for yourself? A couple of questions I kind of have is, when did you graduate? Before you even went to the coding bootcamp, what was your previous industry experience? And then, we'll start with that.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Corum. Before I went into Coder Foundry, I was an accountant, and I hated the idea of working for somebody else as an accountant, so I had my own bookkeeping firm for a couple years. I was like, you know what? Tired of this. I wanted to do something that was a little bit more fun, a little bit more involved from my point of view. So I ended up looking up boot camps and Coder Foundry. I kind of found it, and it kind of just went from there. I went in January of 2020 and graduated in March of 2020. And that's my story.
Very cool. So have you found a position yet?
Oh, yeah. I found a position not too long after I graduated. I was fortunate in that way because literally the day we graduated was the day quarantine went into effect in North Carolina. So there was like a 3-month period there where it was looking real rough. But after that, I got a position.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
How about you, Anthony?
Yeah. I'm Anthony Duvall. I went to Coder Foundry. I started in October 2020, graduated in December. Before that, I worked in grocery stores my entire life. I was manager of the meat and seafood department. So that's kind of what I did. It was never something I always wanted to stick with. I always was looking for something out, and I was finally in a position financially where I could quit that job and be able to live with my savings to take the boot camp and really focus on learning to code and move on from there.
That's awesome. So you just, over time, just kept putting money away little by little?
Yeah. Working in grocery stores when COVID hit, there was a lot of overtime. Let's just put it that way. And was able to basically bank all that money I made from then.
Okay, really cool. And since then, have you found a position yet, or are you still looking?
I have. I started at the beginning of April.
Awesome. Congratulations on that. That was recent.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so why did you both choose Coder Foundry to begin with? And, we're going to talk over each other. Feel free to just, whoever says it first.
I guess I'll go first on this one. I was actually just looking at coding boot camps in general, and one of the things about Coder Foundry is they have their funnel down. Like the moment that you show interest in Coder Foundry, they will hand walk you into that program. So for me, it was more of a thing where it just it flowed that way. I took the little quiz that they had, and then from there on, they just kept following up with all the next steps. And before I even knew it, I was a part of the program.
Interesting. So you kind of just approached it like, I'm kind of curious about it. Let's dig into it. And they just had like a next step delivered at the right time to keep you moving forward?
Yes, exactly that. And for me, it didn't... I was never really too concerned about the language. I knew no matter what language you learn at any boot camp, it's pretty much going to lead somewhere. So
okay. Do you feel like I don't know, like if they have a sales department or anything like that, do you feel like there was any pressure to join?
I don't think they like explicitly pressured me to join.
Okay.
I think they are so good at walking you through it that you sometimes say yes to things you don't even know you're saying yes to, but I never felt pressured.
Okay.
Yeah, the owner, Bobby, who is like, you'll see his face as soon as you go on their website and start looking at stuff. He's really good at getting your energy up and getting you excited about the program. So
that's awesome. Okay. So, what was your second choice? What did you almost pick?
You want to go on this one, Anthony?
Oh, sure. I mean, I didn't really have much of a second choice. I found out about Coder Foundry from my girlfriend's father, who works at a small software company, and they hire almost exclusively from Coder Foundry. So just hearing that and hearing that, there's a real throughway from, going to the boot camp to getting a job with this program, was pretty much, I just looked right at it and just joined in.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've looked at some online versions, but I knew myself well enough to know I need an in-person boot camp in order to really. It's just the way that I learn. I like to have that energy of having other people around me.
I'm exactly the same way. So.
Well, yeah, that's why I have so much empathy for people that are kind of like, especially when they signed up right before COVID and it all of a sudden switched to remote. Like, it's not the same experience. It just isn't. And that goes across the entire industry. And so it's not really a shot at any specific coding bootcamp. A lot of coding bootcamps struggle with that. So, when you finally got in, what'd you learn?
For me, it was pretty much the whole .NET stack, essentially. So we start off at first just learning your basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then after like 2 or 3 weeks of that, we just go straight into doing all kinds of C# based stuff. So we use C# for everything, SQL. When I was in there, they did Xamarin. I don't think they do that anymore for good reason. So
I've never even heard of that. What is that?
So Xamarin is this, you can make mobile apps that work on Android and Apple phones.
Oh, okay.
And you can use just C# to do it. And it actually is native, like it compiles into native code. So it runs super fast on Android and Apple. They are recently changing, or with .NET 6, they're actually going to roll that into a thing called MAUI. And that's why, it makes no sense to learn Xamarin because it's going to change soon anyways. So
okay.
There's a little bit of that.
You made the statement that, I don't really care about the language I had to learn because I could eventually get a job. Did you feel like learning the .NET stack or C# was a less marketable stack versus other stacks in your area or wherever you looked?
Yeah, for that, I mean, it's hard to say. I think when I got out of the boot camp, it was right at the peak of everybody is slowing down for COVID. Mid-March was pretty much like the moment where everybody went like, oh crap, things are hitting the fan. So there was a part of me that was worried about it right then, because every once in a while you'll see people going like, oh, React, Angular, JavaScript, this, Python, that. But I think that's just because sometimes we have a tendency to see the things that we don't have access to or that we don't necessarily have experience with, like stronger than we see the multiple things that we do know, if that makes sense. Like it sticks out more when you think, this really sucks. I can't apply for this job, or, I don't want to apply for this particular job. Even though I probably had just as many things pop up for, .NET or C#.
It would have been really interesting to put all that on a spreadsheet and see if it was just your perception or, not.
Yeah.
Okay. So what did you learn, Anthony?
I was later that year, so it was mostly the same course. You start off with your same HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then you go into your C#. Everything's in an MVC design pattern, and didn't really learn much SQL at all when I was going through. We used LINQ to communicate with the database almost entirely. There was a small SQL section at the end, but yeah.
Okay. Do you feel like it was a little bit more front end or back end focused?
Probably more back end. It's definitely full stack. You definitely, take every task from the front end to the back end, back to the front end. But it's definitely more of a focus on the back end. On the front end, they teach you Bootstrap and basically use that as a lot of to kind of design your front end on that page.
To expand on what he's saying there, I think that the way it kind of worked is they focused, when they were teaching you things, they focused on the C# and the back end a lot. And then because of the fact that we were building these like giant projects inside of the bootcamp, there was a lot of front end work that went into it that we kind of just had to figure out on our own, where we're like, hey, we want to get this to work. We got to look this up, figure it out, and just get into it. So
I believe the phrase was thrown around that a full stack developer is a back end developer with templates. Was thrown around my cohort a little bit.
Well, so it sounds like they didn't really teach a lot of custom CSS.
Yeah, it wasn't really a focus. I don't think. If anything, it was almost de-emphasized to write a lot of custom CSS. I think it was just something where you'd have to do it. Like, it's just something where if you want something to look right, there's only so far that Bootstrap can take you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if the program does focus heavily on CSS, you still get people that feel like they have to do it. Not a lot of people like CSS. And so I'm different. I actually hated it for like a year, at least a year, until I got way more comfortable with it. I avoided it like the plague. I used Bootstrap. But, I went into front end. It was a little bit more my focus as well. But, okay, so, like you mentioned this idea that this kind of the mindset was to be a strong full stack developer. Like, a lot of this custom CSS and potentially even design concepts, they weren't needed. More of the focus was needed on the back end. And so it feels more like software engineer heavy. And it feels like it focuses on back end more. And I'm going to be completely transparent. Like, I've never learned the .NET stack. I've never learned C#. And so, it's definitely, from what I hear about it and what I've looked up, it's definitely different than the JavaScript ecosystem on top of Node.js, and the patterns are different. And so that's interesting to hear. So when you would actually arrive, early in the morning, what was your day-to-day like through the program?
I guess I'll go first, since I actually went back when it was in person. So I forget what time it started actually, but I'd always go in like 30 minutes early, and I'd have some other people who also like to come in early, and we would just kind of sit there and talk about what we had been going through, and how, like, oh man, this week's been a long week, a lot of the time. And then we would just go straight into it. Like, after we kind of got past our, how do you do's and everything, we just went straight into it. We didn't actually have that much instruction, like, at the beginning of the day. I think we had like set days where we would do instruction, but we had a lot of time to work on our projects on our own, which kind of comes back to Coder Foundry's like main message when it was in person, is that it's kind of like going into a foreign program where you go abroad, where you just learn the language by being in it all the time. And that's kind of how it was taught to us, is we spent so much time every day just constantly coding that it just burned it into our brains.
Burned it into your brain. Okay.
Anthony, yeah, you can go into how it was for the online version of it.
I mean, very similar. You go on the Zoom meeting, started, I believe it was 10 a.m., which was a bit later when they went online, because there were people from the West Coast signing up. So taking into account for time zones and everything, they started a little bit later, local time at least. You log in. Normally, you could get on the Zoom call 10, 15 minutes early. Someone would be in there. One of the instructors would let you in, and just hang out, talk to some people. Early morning, get some questions in, and then it was right into it. There's normally like a short discussion on the day's plans, and then what you're doing, and then a little instruction like, this is how you do this, and then straight into it. This is how the grid system works in Bootstrap. Go make some columns, type of thing. And as you keep going, again, like that, every day, it's just keep working. Some days would be almost no instruction at all, entirely just work days when we were really deep into our projects, and then the instructors were just there to answer questions, and you're just doing your projects.
Okay. Did you how much emphasis was put on data structures and algorithms in the program?
I don't know if there was an explicit emphasis put on data structures and algorithms. I think there was a desire to make things work as quickly as possible, to have those load times, speed up. But I think the main focus of of Coder Foundry was to make it so that you were comfortable with working with programming languages in general. But I don't think it had much of a focus on algorithms. And to be honest, I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't know exactly how my feelings are on it, because I did learn data structures and algorithms later. Like, I just went on my own time to do that. And I think that if I had gone into that first thing without knowing how to program, I would have spent a little bit more time in my brain thinking, oh, wait a minute, how do I code this? Instead of now, when I go to data structures and algorithms, I don't think, how do I code this? I think, how do I solve this? So I think it's interesting. There's a case to be made for focusing heavily at first on data structures and algorithms, but there's also a case to be made for getting straight into the coding first, in my opinion.
Yeah, and so the one argument really to support that, and why a lot of coding boot camps do implement that, like you said, I think you present them too early. That's not necessarily a good thing. I think understanding fundamentals a little bit first is a little bit better for a lot of students. But ultimately, we don't really need to go into depth about this, but there are still companies that test with whiteboards. There are still companies that will present online tests. And let's face it, this entry-level market, it's really, really oversaturated. I'm sure you experienced that. And so, a lot of companies, when they get hundreds of applications, sometimes they got to figure out ways to weed that down just a little bit. And they don't have, time to test, 300 to 500 junior engineers that are coming in. So that's one way. And you could argue for or against, but I just like to look at both perspectives, including, like I've heard from my hiring manager and other people that do bring software engineers in. So do you feel like people might need to supplement that to be prepared for those types of interviews?
Do you want to take this one, Anthony?
Sure. I think, especially after you finish and are looking at a job, I think it would be very helpful to look in that kind of thing. You don't have to, do a deep dive into it, but you should have the concepts down at least, and have a vague idea going into it.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's also something to mention that it's kind of like the higher you go in terms of like the well-known nature of a company. So, your Googles, your Facebooks, all that. The more data structures and algorithms tend to be important in the interviewing process, where I think Coder Foundry is a little bit more focused on getting you a job in the market. And so they don't have that like extreme emphasis on you need to be at a top coding or programming company. And I think that once you go down to a more local level, it's a lot less focused on the data structure. Now, that's not to say that every local company doesn't focus on data structures and algorithms, because, of course, the system's a little broken. But I think it's less emphasized the smaller you get.
Yeah, and it really is it's a variety. And when it comes to startups, because I worked at 3 different startups. I love startups. I love the feel of it. There's a reason why I didn't join a larger company. But it's there, and you got to be aware of it. So I'm glad hopefully both of you supplemented that. But you got your job, so that's important. So when you were being taught this material, did you have instructors and TAs to help out?
For me, there was 2 instructors and 1 TA, and basically we had 2 rooms. So one room would have half the class with 1 instructor, and the other room would have the other half of the class with another instructor. And we had 1 TA that went between both. So that was all we had, and I think it worked well.
On my end, we'd had 2 instructors, 1 TA. Pretty much at any given point in the course, there's only 1 instructor there at a time teaching, and while the other instructor was doing background stuff, oftentimes getting stuff ready for what they were going to go to, and then the TA was always there. we would often do Zoom breakout rooms, so you could break up into smaller groups, and the TA and instructors would kind of float around and see what was going on in there. But they did promote like helping each other. Like once you understood something, help teaching the other people how to do it. They promoted that a lot too.
Okay. And actually, to go to that point of helping each other, there's a lot of that had to be done in my cohort, just because at that time, Bobby was actually working on his book, so he wasn't around as much as he usually would be. And something to keep in mind is that one of the teachers actually works as a programmer for like the second arm of the company that actually does software consulting. And he would be on that quite a bit, working on that. So you're learning from somebody who's up to date on all the software. Like, I loved having conversations with that guy. It's just always interesting to pick his brain and see what he's working on. So,
well, let me ask you this. I'm really curious about both of your opinions. Would you rather have an instructor that's also working on the side as a software engineer, keeping his skills up to date, but possibly stretched too thin to be able to teach the course, as much as someone that maybe doesn't have that real world experience, isn't keeping their skills up to date, but they're there all the time?
For me, I'm a little bit of an outlier on this. I absolutely love the fact that he was, that I kind of had a lot of time to just do things on my own. I really enjoyed just having this feeling of, oh crap, I have to figure out a problem and then figuring it out. It was a ton of fun, and it was tons of fun to go around and help other people in the classroom with any issues they were having. So I loved that particular style. It worked perfectly for me, but I also know a lot of people in my cohort that were like, no, I kind of need a little bit more of an actual present instructor for things. So it's a little bit of a tough thing. For me personally, though, loved it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm actually in a real similar spot. So there's always an instructor around. It's not like at any point there was no instructor and you couldn't get help with anything. There's always an instructor around, and the TA is always around to help. But yeah, similarly, like I love just figuring out the problems and really learning how to do it and get hands-on. And I remember by the end of the course, I was in my own breakout room just helping people. Like people would come in and I'd answer their questions. That was a real cool thing to, see how other people broke their code and, working on fixing it. So
it's always fun. That's really cool. Okay. So what was the time commitment like? Like every coding bootcamp says it's going to require this many hours, but like how many hours did it actually require?
I'm going to take this one first, actually. So we actually had to be there in person, and we were there from sometime in the morning to 5 o'clock. So I think it was basically a little bit longer than your average work day, just a little bit. But a ton of people would stay after class every day, just kind of continuing to work on things even after the official ending time. And then people had like their own little breakouts. Like we would go to somebody's house on the weekend and just experiment with stuff. And that was a ton of fun as well. So, during that time, it was basically your entire life was programming, at least in that course. It was a little less so for me because I think I picked it up faster than some of the other people in the cohort. So I didn't have to I didn't have to dream at night of code in order to, feel like I was keeping up with the program. But I know a lot of people who literally did nothing but think about code all the time.
Yeah, okay. And so actually that think about code thing, that's something from like week one. As soon as you start, they tell you to prepare for your life for the next 3 months to be code. And you wake up in code, you sleep, you think about coding, and it's from start to end. And it's it was nowhere that crazy, but it is in the online courses, it's probably easier to kind of be there but not be present type of thing, where they encourage you to have your webcam on, but you don't have to. You can easily turn your webcam off and watch Netflix if you really want to, if that's how you want to spend the time you're paying for. But but it's straight. Like I said, we started later, so I think we went till 6. I think it was 10 to 6 every day. And then it was a Zoom meeting, and then they actually had an after hours meeting that ran the entire time that the active class meeting wasn't on. And I mean, I was in there till almost 2 a.m. one night with a couple other guys, and at 1 a.m, one of the instructors actually hopped on and was talking to him. He answered a few of our questions, but it was mostly just talking, picking his brain about the industry and coding and stuff like that. So
I don't know if that was Antonio or if that was Jason that you're talking
Jason.
about. Okay. Yeah, that's the thing. I talked about a little bit before about how the instructor I had, which was Antonio, was kind of stretched thin, and he had his own stuff he was working on, so he wasn't as present as I think some people would have liked. But I have to give the guy just an insane amount of credit. He was super committed to anybody. He would be up all hours of the night helping not only people who were currently in the program, he would help people who were like graduated a couple cohorts ago. I still see people from my cohort asking him questions every now and again, and he's good about answering it. So that's one thing for sure. The instructors at Coder Foundry, they super committed to this.
Yeah, very much, very knowledgeable. And I don't know if I've talked to anybody who's been as enthusiastic about code as Antonio, like when he really gets going on something. Like,
dude's a riot.
Yeah, he's great.
Okay. So shout out to them. Did you both work on portfolio projects? Is that part of the curriculum?
It is. It's actually the first thing you build.
Oh, wow.
Because you build it with just HTML. So that's your HTML introduction, which, I mean, obviously, it's just HTML. So it's like what they do to introduce you to everything. But looking back, I really wish I could have built, my most forward facing project after I knew what I was doing more, for sure. So.
Oh, and it's HTML and CSS.
Yeah, and CSS.
Maybe a tiny bit of JavaScript, not much. Actually, that's not true. Back when I did it, the portfolio itself actually had the JavaScript challenges on the page. I think now on the online class, they actually make separate pages for each of the JavaScript challenges.
You do. They're linked to. They have you link it in your portfolio, but they are separate pages.
Yeah. So it's a little different now, I think, than it was when I did it. So there's a little bit more focus on the JavaScript on the portfolio.
Okay. So by the end of the program, what was the project that you were most proud of?
Personally, I loved the final one we did. It's a financial portal. Just basic, link up you set up your bank accounts in there. You can track, put in what you're spending, create categories for what you're spending on, entertainment, food, whatever. And then basically lets you just track what you're spending. But that was the final project. It was the first project where from the very start of the project, I had a firm grasp on MVC and C#. And so it was a lot of fun for me to really make that project my own and really do, put everything I've learned so far in this course into this project.
So wait, did you actually link your bank accounts to that app?
Not your actual bank accounts. You would enter a bank account with, and it'd say it has this much money in it.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
we weren't using any expensive APIs for that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe there's a free version of the API if you're just testing it out, but I'm pretty sure those kind of APIs don't run cheap.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you can easily, for Chase, I have an account with Chase. I'm sure it's complicated to set that up potentially. They take security very seriously, which I love, but there probably is some sort of merchant account or bank account you could hook up with a free API. I would be very impressed with Coder Foundry if they had you set that up and that integration up. Setting up an integration alone as a junior developer, it's not an easy thing to do. And I think that would make a really impressive portfolio project. So I was just curious.
Yeah. For me, the project I was most proud of, I'm going to say we had a bug tracker, which is just I don't know, it's just project management software. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that if you ever hear about Coder Foundry, it's kind of the big advertised thing is the bug tracker. It's the main centerpiece of what they do. I spend a lot of time on that one, probably more time on that proportionally than on any other project. So I kind of put the financial portal that Anthony was talking about a little bit on the back burner, so I wasn't as proud of that. But I will say the financial portal, back when I was in person, I think when they did it online, they were still trying to figure out a couple of things, so it went a little bit slower. But when we were in person, we created an API, a REST API that could like communicate with anything that you wanted to hook that up to. And after the cohort ended, I used Xamarin to create a full mobile app for that financial portal. And it communicated via APIs and everything. And it was so cool. Love that thing to death. I was so proud of that because I had to like basically learn the entire structure of how to work with this thing called XAML, which is just like a modification of XML in order to make everything visually look right. And then I had to learn APIs, like how to really rig it up correctly. Asynchronous programming, just tons of stuff. So that was probably my most proud part.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun project. I'm curious, do they ever encourage you to build a project on your own, or is it all projects they tell you to build?
It's all projects they tell you to build in the course. And if you ask about it, basically their reasoning for that is they want you building projects that are relevant to the businesses you're going to be applying for, that any recruiter or anybody working can open that project and understand. You can build a great, I think he used the example of like a skiing app where you can find all these great places to ski and network skiers, but if you're not a skier, is that relevant to you? And they want like business relevant applications for you to be able to show at the end of the cohort.
Okay, so here's where I'm going to give my opinion with that. Just comparing to other coding bootcamps that do branch off into personal projects that are graded and monitored in a different way. Sometimes you get this from employers where they feel like when a coding bootcamp just spits out a bunch of cookie cutter projects and every graduate is coming out with the same project, it's hard to differentiate between those graduates. It's hard to differentiate what they can actually do because like most people are aware that, it's very different building a project that's assigned to you and that follows the curriculum. And it's different from like a self-paced course versus like an actual coding bootcamp. Usually there's more complexity in the coding bootcamp, but what often helps people and students stand out is building these personal projects where they had to identify a real problem that exists and they had to figure out how to apply all the fundamentals that they just learned to an actual technical solution that employers would care about. And it usually ends up turning, a lot of people will actually solve their own problems with the technical solution, and it turns into a passion project. It turns into a project where features are added and it becomes more complex. So do you feel like, I'm blatantly kind of disagreeing with Coder Foundry with that, with what would be more valuable, obviously, but do you feel like you could still build your personal project? Like, could Coder Foundry implement something where you could build your personal project and still focus on the industry that you want to apply to? Like, it might not be this bank financial manager app, but you could still build a financial app that is different. And it also forces you to think outside the box a little bit on like how the architecture is going to happen, how all the features are going to kind of like interact with each other.
I think this is kind of a weird tangent, but I think it's kind of an important one to gets into the argument of how long should a coding bootcamp be when you're paying as much as you are paying for it. The thing you got to remember about Coder Foundry is it is a 3-month bootcamp. So to a degree, I agree with you, but I think what they were trying to do is make it so that, they don't want people to spend a ton of time inside the bootcamp just thinking, well, what do I want to make? There's a little bit of that. Like some people might go into it and they'll be like, oh my God, bam, I have an idea that I want to make right off the bat. And then there's some people, me, that would probably go into it and say, well, shoot, let me think about it for like a week or 2 weeks before I even finally come up with an idea of what I would want to do. So I think that's why they kind of emphasize that. I do agree. There's a little bit of, I know that they try to argue against it. I've seen Bobby multiple times try to fight back against that logic that it's cookie cutter. But there is a little bit of that. Let's just be honest. It's just how it is. Even if everything looks different, it's still like, even if you have a bunch of people showing you the project, it's going to be hard to think, oh, wait a minute, who was it that did this particular one? Who did this particular one? So there's that. It also goes into the fact that I think the most important thing you can do after the boot camp is creating your own stuff. I think so many people focus on putting out those applications. Like, oh man, I put out 100 applications last week and I got nothing. I see that all the time on LinkedIn. Hundreds of applications, nothing came in. I guarantee you, I put in 4 applications, I think, in the entire time that I've ever job searched, and I've gotten 2 jobs since then. And I get offers today, even. It's literally just, you got to show people that they can trust that you can do the work. And the only way you can do that is by actually doing something. That's just my opinion, though.
Okay.
Yeah, Anthony, if you even remember what the question is, because I went on such a long rant.
It is I mean, they do kind of come out cookie cutter to a degree. I do think, and you can definitely look and you can definitely tell the better ones from the less better ones. And in some ways it's easier to stand out that way because you can clearly see, this bug tracker versus this bug tracker and everything this one does and everything this one doesn't. So, I mean, just put in the kind of context, I was told that to the job I got when they were first, when Coder Foundry was first shipping me or selling me to them, that they handed them, I think they said 4 or 5 resumes from my cohort, and I was the only one that they wanted an interview with. So obviously, out of although we all had the same projects, obviously something in mine stood out.
Yeah.
Well, maybe this question would be, it almost sounds like both of you did pretty well in the program. Maybe this question would be very interesting to hear from people that were on the lower end that were struggling to really get through the program. Do you think maybe the answers would be a bit different?
Maybe. It's hard to say just because, if they're on the lower end of the program, it could be that, if they had a less structured thing to work on, then it would turn out even sloppier or something like that. And then it would actually have a worse effect because, you could have a decently running bug tracker. And I don't think anybody had a terribly running one. All of them looked at least were functional, mostly, 90% functional at the least. Whereas if everybody was doing their own project, they might have something that was 50% functional. And then it's oh, well, man, really don't want to hire the person who can't even get a functional app out there. So I guess, yeah, that's just my thought process on it.
Okay. So when you did graduate, how well do you feel like you were prepared for an actual developer position?
I think I was pretty well prepared. There was a couple big holes that I was worked on shoring up, SQL being the biggest one. Mm-hmm. It came very clear that I needed to know a lot more SQL than what they taught. And that's basically what I spent most of my time after the cohort learning as far as coding goes. But other than that, I do feel like in the position I am, I am pretty well equipped and am able to do the job efficiently. So.
And in .NET, you can never know enough SQL. That's kind of a long running thing I've noticed is you can never know enough SQL. As far as I'm concerned, it's a 3-month program. Yeah, I've had holes. Let's call it what it is. And I think that's partially because there's just so much junk out there that literally, no matter what program you did, even if you were in a program for 2 years, you'd still feel like you had some holes in
that's just coding in general,
exactly.
Isn't it? There's always so much more. No matter how much you know, it's just a drop in the bucket to what's actually out there.
Yeah. But that being said, the first job that I did get, it was eerily similar to what I learned in Coder Foundry. It was 1-to-1. I don't think there was a single new technology to me that was used when I went to the first job that I had, which is both good and bad in some ways.
Yeah.
But
I will say this, coming into my first job here, it is not 1-to-1. There are a lot of differences. We're using a lot of dated .NET technologies, but with what I learned at Coder Foundry, I do feel I'm able to pick it up rather quickly, and I'm able to figure out what I need to do for the most part on my own. And and am able to get the job done still.
Okay. So how many people were in your cohorts?
I want to say, gosh, it was either somewhere between 24 and 30, or
I want to say mid-20s in mine.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's kind of hard because it's like the same people that speak out a lot and, are generally stand out in class a lot for either asking questions or answering questions. And so those handful of people are the people you remember. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot more of a problem in an online course.
I'm sure.
I didn't know barely anybody in the other room because as I mentioned earlier, we had 2 rooms, but I knew even the people who didn't talk at all inside of my room intimately well. Just because it was like we were troops in war back in there. I knew everybody on that side. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I would argue is that's kind of a high ratio. One instructor to like 20 to 30 students is generally high with a lot of coding boot camps. So I would actually say, and I'm just comparing it to other coding boot camps I've reviewed, that might have contributed even if your instructor was working at a software engineering position. Like I've heard a lot of complaints about, like usually 1 to 10 is a perfect ratio. I mean, not perfect, but like it's usually a much more comfortable ratio, and everyone feels a lot more confident that all their questions are getting answered, stuff like that. So, I will say 1 to mid-20s isn't a fair ratio because like they have 2 full-time instructors. They're rarely both there at the same time, but they are oftentimes. And there's the TA that's there full-time. And there are times, or at least in my in the online course, where you did break into small groups, and each small group had their own instructor there. For times they have other people at the company that will come in from time to time that aren't necessarily instructors, but that do various jobs with the company that will show up sometimes for the small groups.
Yeah, actually, going on to Anthony's point, it's kind of like 2.5 instructors in the program because the TA did a lot, and he was very good at what he did.
Sure.
So it's not like one of those situations where you have a TA who, even though this actually is exactly what happened, the TA sometimes gets hired. Like the cohort before, Drew he's the TA, and he was actually hired from the cohort before mine. But he was very knowledgeable about what he needed to know. And so I never felt like he was lesser as a teacher than the other teachers, although his, teaching style might not have been as refined. So it's like 2.5 people for 24.
All right. So that's my own opinion, but it's still helpful to get your perspective on like how you felt, like if everyone did have the right amount of attention, and there
absolutely not. Definitely not the right amount of attention, but different people needed different amounts of attention. Right. So there's that.
Well, and that 1 to 10 ratio is really for those people that struggle a little bit more as well. Yeah. But that makes a lot of sense. So how many people in your cohort made it all the way through?
That 25 or that ish number is the number of people that made it to the end. I think we started with a little over 30 at the very beginning.
Okay. Oh, okay.
It was interesting in my class. I don't know exactly what happened, and I don't even know if I should technically say this out loud. But like I mentioned, 2 rooms. My room, not a single person didn't pass in my room. And then in the other room, I think by the end of it, even though there was like 12 or so people in there, like 4 of them remained by the end of it. And it was interesting because my teacher was the one that was actually away more. So it was actually less attention in the room that I was in, but everybody passed in the room that I was in. So it was kind of a curious thing.
Yeah. It also is worth saying that they give you 2 weeks to back out, where you can just back out and not have to worry about any payments.
Yeah, but I want to go ahead and clarify something. 2 weeks to back out of that program and get out without having to pay anything is admittedly a bit of a marketing trick because let's be honest, 2 weeks in, you're not going to know at that point quite yet
I mean, the first 2
tough it
weeks are
gets.
just HTML, CSS, JavaScript. You're not even into C# yet, so.
Of course, you can also back out later. I think it's like for each quarter of the way, it's like you get a quarter less of a refund for the time. So like 25%, it goes, you get 75% return, so on and so forth. So it's not entirely unfair, but it's also, let's call a spade a spade. The 2-week full refund is only for people who literally go in on the first day or so and says, actually, you know what? I don't have this kind of commitment in my life. I'm back. It's nothing to do with the coding itself.
There were, I can think of 2 people in my cohort that started coming in and started with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We're just like, I just can't do this. And they took their 2 weeks and backed out. I don't know if because of COVID, there were more people coming into the boot camp that maybe wouldn't have otherwise, that aren't kind of predisposed to this kind of thing, that were just like, hey, I need to do something, let me try coding type of thing, if that had a factor on it or not. But
yeah.
Okay. That's still helpful context to know. Within like 6 months after you graduated, how many people in your cohort got a job?
Ooh, that's a tough question to answer.
It is
for a couple of reasons.
yeah.
One, like I said, we hit there right at that COVID, like that super strong COVID moment. So it was pretty tough going there for the first couple of months. I would say pretty much everybody except for maybe 3 people I knew, that I personally knew, that I talked to regularly, got a job that wanted it in that 6 months. But it's also worth mentioning, I am almost positive that a couple of people just went back to what they used to be doing. And that's unfortunate. But it's just a reality of the situation. And I'm sure in the online version, it's even worse, especially now that the recruiting arm of Coder Foundry is doing something weird. I don't exactly know.
Yeah, it's actually, I'll go into that a little bit. So my cohort was definitely not as successful in finding jobs, and especially right off the bat. I think I can know of 1 or 2 people that found a job within like the first 3 months. And then going off that, since after those first 3 months, out of what I know of, there's another handful of us that did find jobs, but the percentage for my cohort, I don't think is very high. Again, it's impossible for me to know for sure, but just from some of the people I still keep in contact with, it does seem pretty rough out there.
The online transition, I think, was really brutal for Coder Foundry in terms of recruitment, which is why I don't think they do it at all anymore. It used to be they had really, really strong local ties, and like kind of what Anthony said earlier, he knew people who actually funneled in from Coder Foundry into his job, the job that he mentioned. And so they had that local thing going for them. And then when they opened it up to online, they're like, okay, well, let's also open it up to people all around the country. And because of that, it no longer was, oh, we're trying to find you a job locally where we have these connections. It's like, we're trying to find you a job everywhere. And I think there's one thing that can be learned from this. It's that when you try to focus your attention everywhere, you get no results. And so it was rough, I think, for the online class especially, if I had to guess.
Very much so. And I do know their whole recruitment arm is completely different now, new people. And even the way they do things. I know in my cohort, when you're in the cohort, it was learn to code, worry about networking, learn about getting a job, all that stuff after you finish and you get the coding down. But even now, I'm seeing people from the current cohort, connect with me on LinkedIn. They're posting blog posts every week and, sharing and really trying to network, from in the middle of the course as they're going along. So it definitely sounds like they learned a bit from what's going on and they're changing the way they do things. But
yeah. And actually, this all comes to probably my biggest general concern about Coder Foundry is I think the marketing can somewhat be misleading. It was good for me because, again, I just really loved the program. I loved coding. And so all of that stuff kind of fell into place for me. But I think that they kind of heavily marketed the idea that you'll have a recruiter working for you afterwards who will help you get a job, especially they were saying like 3 months after the boot camp, like 90% of you will have a job or something like that. And they're like, oh, we'll give you a professional headshot and we'll, do professional resume and all this stuff. And I think a lot of people made their decision to join kind of based on that whole package of extra services in the recruitment arm of it. And I mean, the headshot was good, but it wasn't like as good as I think, like if you went to a really, really professional headshot. The resume, I hate to say this, I hope that nobody from Coder Foundry takes offense to this. The resume that they build for you is just not super appealing. It's very heavily Coder Foundry branded. And I never felt really great about pushing out a resume to people, and it has like Coder Foundry branding all over it. So it was, I don't know. And that on top of the fact that, it's like make it as your job as the software engineer at Coder Foundry. Like all of those things wrapped up together, I was just like, I don't feel as comfortable sending this resume out as I feel like I would if I kind of just did my own thing a little bit with a lot of that. So I don't know, a little bit of a rant there, but that was my biggest issue is I think they really heavily marketed those extra, services that they bundle in when really the main thing that I enjoyed was the coding itself, and everything else is just a little bit lower standard than I expected.
And that's a really good point. A lot of people do sign up for coding boot camps because of the job search prep, the resume prep, cover letter, even interview prep, stuff like that. A lot of people do join a coding boot camp because is Mark just lagging? Oh no, you're moving, Anthony. Okay, we're good. Anyways, I think a lot of coding boot camps kind of advertise that, and that's why a lot of people are willing to pay that amount of money. And I've heard a lot of coding boot camps, like just talking with leaders in the industry, that's kind of their selling point. And so, if you are making that your selling point and you under-deliver on that, you might just need to re-examine the value that you're really giving back to people, because I can promise you, like, that's a big reason why people sign up for coding boot camps, because the curriculum, all this knowledge is out there, right? You can even like do self-paced course that has a whole structure and everything. And a lot of people sign up for that professional help. So no, I think that's a really good point.
I will say, as for me, I agree that if you're the kind of person who could do a self-paced course, you should 100% do that. I mean, it's expensive to go to the boot camp, and I did do the income share agreement. And for me, that was the right choice, because I absolutely learned better the way that I learned in that boot camp. I would not be a coder today if I tried to self-teach myself. Just would not. It wouldn't happen. But it's something you need to be aware of, is like, if you can do the self-taught way, if you have the discipline to do that, go that way every time.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about that, because I actually reached out to you and I verified, like, are you an actual software engineer at Coder Foundry or not? Because I don't like bringing staff on. I don't like bringing people that were staff on. I'm very skeptical of that, because I'm trying to remove as much bias as possible. And so, like, I can tell you a few people that I reached out to, they were really offended, and they would like go on this rant about, like, well, it's actually this, what do they call it? I can't even think of the words. It was a really clever way to put it. But it was basically like this / coding bootcamp / like internship experience. And like you could just tell, like, they were stretching that truth so thin and just trying to like sell themselves. And it made me feel kind of uncomfortable with like, why is Coder Foundry trying to push this? And Coder Foundry isn't the only coding bootcamp that does this. There are many don't. But there are a few that do. I've heard 1,000 different explanations to justify it. Yeah, so I mean, to verify, neither of you are staff, but yeah, like, what are your thoughts on that?
I've been ranting a lot, so I'll let Anthony go first on this one.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely felt weird. Definitely, putting, full stack developer there. I mean, I don't know. I trusted that that they knew this landscape, way more than I did, and just took their lead for what to do. But yeah, it definitely felt a little weird. Like I said, I think from their perspective, because they do treat the boot camp in a lot of ways like a job, where you have every week you have deliverables for your current project, and they do try to treat it as much like a job as you possibly can in a learning environment. So I think that's their angle coming for it, but it's for sure strange.
And I have a lot of opinions on this, so I'm going to try to keep it from coming out like a fire hose here. If you want to say what you wanted to say first, you can.
No, go ahead.
So yeah, here's the thing. I don't 100%. I didn't love it at all. Let's just put it that way. 100% didn't, because then I'd get on calls with recruiters, hiring managers, people like that, and they would always ask me what Coder Foundry was. So I just ended up having to explain it as a boot camp, and they're like, this experience, but I'm like, yeah, but it's a boot camp. And so in the end of the day, it just made it so I had to spend more time explaining something awkwardly than I would rather have done. But I kind of see a little bit of the point, which is, if you have people who are on LinkedIn and they're searching for candidates for a job, the system's a little bit broken. So it's like, they might search for somebody who has job experience. And so they're going to look for it, and maybe you will pop up over somebody who doesn't have it marked as job experience. I'm not saying that's a great justification, but I think what it comes down to is when everything's broken, sometimes people, in order to make it work, have to break things in their own way.
And so I'm not going to go into the other justifications. Let's just stick to that. So, like this definition of broken, I think it's very difficult for junior engineers, and I empathize. I've been there. It was difficult for me when I went through the process. That was like 5 years ago or something like that. It's become much harder. So I completely get it. You're trying to be careful. You want to try to sell yourself well, and you want to know how you also should know how hiring managers perceive some of this stuff. Like you mentioned, this experience with recruiters, if they're constantly having to ask you, what is Coder Foundry? Is it a company? Is it like a when you're having to explain this several times, that should be, light bulbs should go off in your head. Okay, that gives me a feel for the industry right now. It gives me a feel that what I'm portraying as might be bending the truth a little too much. And we're constantly trying to figure out where the industry is, where recruiting managers are looking for. And so my argument to that is, really, the justification is this feeling like you need to do it to beat the system. My argument is there are a dozen other ways to make yourself stand out. I mentored thousands of junior developers, and I can tell you, majority of them don't do any of the advice I give them. Or the advice that I've shared in videos or anything like that. And it's not that they don't necessarily believe in it. It's just that the job search is really stressful. It's self-defeating, and to be able to stay consistent with a pattern, even just including a cover letter with every application, that's actually a controversial conversation in itself. But what I've seen is when you consistently do that, which it takes a lot of time to be able to do that, and even just 20 minutes of company research, I've seen much more success with that. And so, but a lot of junior engineers will not do that. And so I'm saying I would say 90% of junior engineers could spend a half an hour a day doing something a little bit extra that will make them stand miles apart from their competitors. And I don't think you need to focus on kind of manipulating your experience to beat the recruitment system. So that's my argument against it. I understand people disagree with me.
Yeah, I will say I agree with you on the principle of it. But the thing is, I also don't necessarily judge junior developers who do go to that, who do kind of do things like that, just because I understand where they're coming from. It's tough being out there as a junior developer for a lot of people. And so yeah, I do agree with you on the principle though. And that's why I do often say, again, don't focus on sending out tons of applications. Just focus on being able to show somebody that you're worth trusting, because that's what it comes down to, is trust. If person can trust that you will come into their company and not destroy everything that you put your hands on, then that's pretty much all they really want out of a junior developer. They just want you not to break everything all the time.
Well, I mean, trust, like you literally chose the right word. Trust is what I'm scared of breaking between junior engineers and hiring managers, because there's already a huge frustration. So you can do that. I often think it's dishonest for a coding bootcamp to push that. I'm more sympathetic with the individual software engineers that are just trying to get that position. Absolutely. But my big concern, and I think people should be concerned about it, is like, if you break that trust, if an employer thinks that you're lying in any way, like you can kind of explain that. You can come to a more positive, you could build a more positive relationship with that employer, but you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot before you even start to like get to know each other, before you even present like how good of a software engineer you actually are. So it's, at the end of the day, it's kind of a risk, and you're going to have different hiring managers that interpret it differently. You might get lucky, and sometimes a hiring manager sees like 50 junior engineers bending the truth, and like it doesn't even faze them anymore. They're just like, I just expect you to do it at this point. So there is that. So, but yeah. Just to like solidify my point, I do empathize with a lot of junior engineers. I know it's oversaturated. I feel so bad, looking for a job, especially during the pandemic. Yeah. Okay. So we have 14 minutes left at the most. What I want to solidify with is any other constructive criticism you have about the program. What could they improve?
Oh, Anthony, go first. I've made a lot of my points clear.
Yeah. For me, like the actual like program and learning the code is fantastic. From like straight up, I wouldn't be able to do the job I do right now without this. I needed some kind of instruction. I needed some kind of, even though it wasn't in person, some instructors to be there to help and really teach me. And that part was fantastic. I do feel like they oversold the after the boot camp side of it, where helping you find jobs, the way they were actually like having us do things change as we were going, and I think they no one was really getting any traction, and that was a very frustrating experience on the other end. So I mean, that's the biggest critiques I have, is the after the boot camp and what they kind of sell you versus what you get.
Yeah. I will also say, as somebody who saw a little bit of the online program, like what they did with the online program, I think it would have been better. They transitioned from working in .NET Framework, which was kind of an older thing for C# to .NET Core, and now .NET 5, I guess. And there's a lot of differences, and they changed a lot of stuff in the online version. They changed who the hosting providers were. They changed from SQL to PostgreSQL. They changed a lot of stuff. And I think because of that, the program got slowed down, because I think the instructors were kind of keeping up a little bit ahead of what the class was at. And it slowed things down just a little bit when there were, inevitable problems that would show up every once in a while. So maybe taking like months, maybe once they decide that they're going to change the curriculum that strongly to, really solidify everything, probably would have helped, I think, for the online course. I don't know if, Anthony, you agree with that. And again, I'm talking as somebody who was in person and was the last person, or like the last group to do the stuff they were super comfortable with. They've been doing for years at that point.
Yeah, there were some growing pains, 100%. All the big MVC projects are hosted on Heroku, and to get a .NET Core app onto Heroku, there's some trickery you have to do, and they were kind of figuring that out as we were going along. For sure.
Yeah, I've never set a .NET app up on Heroku, but I am a big fan of Heroku. But I mean, it runs really nicely with Node, so I have no issues with it. Okay.
Well, and that's part of the fact that they were learning Docker at that point. They didn't teach Docker when I was in there, but because they were doing it with Docker, with containers, all that stuff, they had to use that to make it on Heroku. And I think there were some fun.
A number of issues, a number of things that were really easy to mess up and not easy to debug.
Okay. Well, I think that's really useful feedback. And, I really want to emphasize, just because you have constructive feedback obviously doesn't mean it's not a good program, but no program is perfect. And this idea, and this is kind of like the idea of the podcast, and really to like push back against, these misleading marketing strategies, is to dig into the details of some of this and just allow people to make that choice for themselves and have all that data present. And I highly recommend, this isn't a strike against Coder Foundry, any coding bootcamp, anything that's sold to you. If you're talking to advisors, you can have the nicest advisor that seems to be looking out for your best interest, and they mostly might be, but they're still hired. There's still a bias there. So, do as much research as you can, look at reviews. Another quick strategy, toss out the 1-star and 5-star reviews. If you look on Course Report, everything's 5-star now. You can't even tell, where the criticism is.
I agree. I love Coder Foundry. Easily, for me personally, one of the best decisions I've made in my entire life. It was such a great thing for me, but I also know a lot of people who it was 100% the wrong choice for. And so there's just a little bit of that you got to keep in mind. I try to be as super unbiased as possible because I hate seeing the people who ended up not going through with coding afterwards. I hated seeing that, and especially because of the money. Yeah. It's not inexpensive. So I try to help people out as much as possible there. And it's hard because sometimes it's hard to tell whether or not you really like programming or not going into a program. I know I was a little bit mixed before I went in. I did some HTML and JavaScript preparing for it, but I wasn't in love with it until I just got into it, in the boot camp, and switch just flipped, and I just absolutely fell in love. But not everybody feels that way. And I wish there was an easy way to gauge whether that will happen for you, but unfortunately, the truth is, it's not. There's not really a guaranteed way to know whether or not you're going to be like me, or you're going to be somebody who goes, I'm kind of okay with not pursuing this further.
Would one way to possibly be able to do it, like you said, you're never going to know. It could be 2 years on the road, you just quit as a software engineer. There's not a 100% way to know, but would you recommend that someone maybe learns on their own just for a little bit before they join a coding bootcamp? Would that give them a better idea?
Yeah, I think it gives you a better idea. And I especially recommend that before you go into Coder Foundry, you actually spend some time learning on your own. They have a little bit of JavaScript that they make you learn before you get in. You'd have to do a couple of little easy assignments with JavaScript and HTML. But I think that it helped me significantly in the program that I was reasonably comfortable with CSS, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I was reasonably comfortable with that before I went in, and it made everything so much easier going into it. Whereas some people who kind of are just I'm going to learn everything in the boot camp, oh my God, they struggle. That's a struggle when you're trying to learn all of that at the same time. But yeah, I do agree that somebody should do some programming before going into a boot camp. 100%.
Okay. All right. I think that's it, right? Unless either of you have anything to add. All right, cool.
Yep.
So we're at the end. This is a good review. And I do think it's going to be really valuable for a lot of people, especially considering Coder Foundry. So I appreciate you coming on. Let's do our outros. So Mark, feel free to shout if you have a blog out, app out that you're trying to push, gain a user base behind, anything like that. But if people want to reach out to you, where could they reach you?
Yeah, just look for me on LinkedIn. I'm so busy right now. I don't have time to be doing tons of the extra stuff I'd love to be doing right now. But that's because of the company specific thing. So yeah, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm connected to a ton of people, so you'll probably be able to find me somehow.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. How about you, Anthony?
Yeah, same. You can find me on LinkedIn, Anthony Duval. I don't do any kind of blogs or anything like that. I've never been a fan of writing, to be honest.
Me neither. So, okay.
That's why we have a podcast, huh?
That's right.
Oh yeah, I have no problem. Like I will look like a fool. I don't even care if like I'm tired, I stutter throughout the whole thing. Like I have so much fun doing raw, but you ask me to like sit down and write, I can't do it. There's a reason I haven't started a vlog. So, all right, cool. This is a good episode. I think it's going to be valuable. If it's not, let me know in the comments. But I'm very curious what you think about what Mark and Anthony shared. Please leave that in the comments. And, I'm going to start asking a little bit more. Like I said, I don't mean to come off as salesy, but I have a Patreon. If you like what we're doing, please consider supporting me. It's patreon.com/DonTheDeveloper. I should be able to link a card on the YouTube video, but it's incredibly helpful. I don't accept sponsorships. I think I have one affiliate link that gets no clicks. It's like Treehouse. It's a program that I do really enjoy. It's what I learned. So it's something that I can confidently say that it might be a path for you. But other than that, thanks for watching. Even just your views help. So if you like this video, leave a like and definitely stick around for a couple minutes. But Mark, Anthony, thanks so much for coming on. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.